something happened I thought pretty significant today, and it might be a little bit too behind or inside media for some, but Bob Lee, the general, Bob Lee, announced via social media, I'm pretty sure, his retirement from ESPN. And I can't imagine that Rich wouldn't want us to bring that up on his show. Yeah, he'd want to talk about the Yankees and the home run record in Michigan and all the other Nick-related content and everything else going on in the world. But Bob Lee, who 40 years, I mean, we're talking about, we're all, I think, about the same age.
Yeah.
Now. I'm 46 years of age.
38.
This was the bedrock of ESPN. There's no other way to put it. I mean, you might have had a favorite Sports Center host. I know I grew up on the Sunday show with Dan and Keith. Having the opportunity to work with Dan as I did in my career for a couple of years was so impactful, changed everything for me. But as all of us, again, somewhere similar in age of a particular generation, 40 years, you think about Berman, Mees, Bob Lee is, I mean, he built the place. Bob Lee literally, he built ESPN into what it is today. And certainly, whatever your opinions are of ESPN, some people think maybe it's past. It still sets the agenda for the day in sports for me. People might have their problems with the different shows and the debate shows. We all understand not everything is for everybody. But ESPN is still the brand of sports. It still sets the agenda for sports. Oftentimes, and I can say from experience and also as a lifelong viewer, it's a lot of fun and games, but when it was time to be serious, who did you trust more than Bob Lee?
Exactly.
Who did you turn to more than Bob Lee when you needed journalism, Big J journalism, when you needed that conversation? That was Bob Lee. He may have had his thoughts on the evolution of sports broadcasting, certainly on the SportsCenter side, and I think it was all for the better. Not everybody needs to just be a homogenized version of how the network started. Personality came into play, as mentioned, Dan, Keith, obviously with Rich and Stu. When I mentioned on social media that I was doing this show, I had friends of mine who are in the business who said they got into this because of Rich and Stuart Scott. But the guy who was there in the beginning was this guy. And he was that guy. He was that guy. And there were times where I was dispatched into staff meetings where somebody from digital would come over and somebody from television would come over, and you'd have Bob Lee in the meeting room. And Bob Lee, I'll never forget it. He sort of was lamenting the fact that, and this, I don't remember the exact quote, but I remember this word being used, and it sounds like Bob Lee. I'm sure you can hear it coming out of Bob Lee's mouth. Whatever happened to the days where we used polysyllabic words in sports broadcasting? And I remember that. It was over 20 years ago, and it had an impact on me that it's okay to use polysyllabic words every once in a while. You don't want to lose everybody in your audience, but talk about maintaining a standard. I don't know if he was ever a guest on this show, but I cannot imagine that Rich didn't have had nothing but high praise and an affinity for what Bob Lee did and meant to him, both literally and figuratively in his career. And walking through the halls and seeing people like that, I can tell you, doesn't matter if you're on television or if you're on the production side, that's Chris Berman. That's Bob Lee. That became Rich Eisen. That became Dan Patrick. But that guy was right there at the beginning.
Yeah, did you have any interactions with Bob?
I was usually scared of him, to be honest with you, because I was always afraid that I would get tongue-tied or that I would use a polysyllabic word incorrectly. And that Bob would, the general would say, come on, man, like clean it up a little bit. Not a whole lot. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you. I didn't, being on radio and television at that time, there was some separation, and radio wasn't really what it was today. Didn't become that, truthfully, until Dan started doing it. But how about you guys, Bob? A good Jersey guy, too.
Well, I actually was telling Brockman a story. When I was a little kid, Bob worked at TV3, the local station in northern Jersey. So he used to do high school football games and hockey games. And I used to, as a kid, I was always into sports TV. So one of my first things I ever got to see was TV3 broadcasting games. So I would sit next to Bob. I would sit right where the cameras were at center ice or wherever they were for football games, and I would watch. And it was like one of the things that kind of made me want to get into sports broadcasting. And I eventually got to be like a spotter for him and eventually Bruce Beck, who's in New York.
Right.
And I would sit there and give the guys who made a play or whatever in a headset and push a little button, IFB, which I had no idea what it was called back then, to sit in their ear and like to basically tell them in their ear, this guy scored or that guy scored. So to see Bob go to ESPN at that point, when it was just that small little thing, was like cool because he was that Jersey guy that made it big, even as a little kid.
Yeah, I mean that small little thing, that trailer. I mean, and it's hard. You know, sometimes they'll show you an aerial shot of what it looks like. They call it the campus of ESPN,
Yeah.
right?
Huge.
And they show you that. I remember when I interviewed there, the instructions I was given. You get on I-84 East, you get off, you make a left, you're going to pass a bunch of cows, then you're going to pass some more cows, and then you're going to take a left, you're going to come around a bend, and you're just going to see it. And you sort of start picturing what that looks like in your head before you actually get there, right? So you had this image of ESPN. There are no drone shots of it. You know, you'd see a satellite dish every once in a while. But yeah, just get off the exit, make a left, exit 31, keep cruising down the road, pass a couple cows, you're going to pass some more cows. You start thinking to yourself, like, where am I going? Where did they build this? And that's what it was when it started. Bob took that chance, that opportunity to go work in this trailer, right, where the raccoons were, where the skunks occasionally would get in, to do 24-hour sports. Who ever heard of such a thing? It was a crazy concept at the time, something that we all now on how many different networks do we consider this just part of our daily routine?
You just take for granted, right?
Totally.
I think for me, when you look at Bob, it's just he was the voice. He was the conscience. When there was a big story, an important story, a scandal, whether it was in college or FIFA or something of that regard, it was Bob who came to the forefront. You're like, okay, Bob's speaking on this. I better listen because he's going to be right. He's going to have the right point of view, the right perspective. And this is how I should probably think about this issue because Bob is the one that's giving it to us and telling us how it is.
He's the adult.
He's the adult in the room.
In
Yeah,
the toy
and
department of sports where we're all a little bit goofy and we throw footballs around the news studio and we kick soccer balls around. I mean, he had an amazing career. I mean, I don't want to eulogize Bob Lee because
no, of course
hopefully there's more to come from Bob.
Yep.
But always that one line, just that one word, I remember to this day. And as soon as I heard, I said, polysyllabic. Polysyllabic. Bob Lee in a meeting full of sports reporters, aspiring producers, and otherwise. So we wish him the best in retiring. He is a legend, and there's no other way to say it, full stop.
For more of The Rich Eisen Show, tune to Audience Channel 239 on DirecTV for free on BR Live or download The Rich Eisen Show app.